How's your day?
It's been pretty good, pretty non-eventful.
Oh,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
What counts as like a high event threshold for you? Like,
General, like I'm a substitute teacher, so
okay,
high event would be like a fight, or if kids are being rude or disrespectful or something. But today was really, really calm. Nothing really went on.
what's your specialty when it comes to teaching?
Social studies.
Oh,
Yeah. Social
okay.
studies. But for subbing, I do anything. They just put me in there. Yeah.
Did you, does your state require you to have like a field of research declared? And what was it that got you ready for social studies? How did you end up doing that?
Well, I'm not technically a substitute. That's what I do, but I'm an intern for a graduate program so that I can become a full teacher.
Oh, so by substitute teaching, wait, in a grad college?
In a grad program.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay. So you're like running around all these different periods. I'm thinking you're in like high school or middle school
no.
and fights are breaking out now. I'm imagining fights breaking out in like grad students. Like,
Oh no. So
you dropped my p-value by 5. I don't know.
No, I'm not. No. I am working in a high school.
Okay.
So I applied to a program that has it's basically a work study. I get my tuition paid off if I go into the schools and substitute, or one specific school and substitute.
Okay. And so you're doing that and balancing your post-grad work.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
In social studies or sciences, I guess it would be.
In social studies, but it's an education program, so it's mostly just like educational psychology, differentiated education, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Or is it in a education school?
In like the high school, or
I mean, your program, is it part of like a dedicated education college, or is it just a subfield within a larger university context?
a subfield, but it's a pretty big program for the area. Yeah.
Are you liking what you're learning in that?
No.
Is it redundant or wokish? If I may use the phrase.
Wokish is an understatement. It's very it's very much like that. And a lot of what they teach is like, and I think this is just how education has been for a long time, because I'm like reading a lot of papers from like the 90s and 2000s and stuff, and it's just like this constant attempt at like bridging social inequalities through education. But in the back of my head, and in some of the papers I write too, like teachers can't do that. Like that's so much bigger than us. Like this not like the best that we can do is try to prepare all of the kids for the world. But we're not going to make the poor kids rich, and we're not going to make the rich kids poor. We're not, it's all of this stuff. And they do a lot of this like cultural sensitivity stuff too. And you have to integrate kids' cultural experiences into the classroom, but they don't let you do it in any kind of intuitive way, like, oh, where are you from? Or, let's do this kind of day or whatever. It's more like, Black kids like doing this, so you should do this. Indian kids like doing this, so you should do this. And it's like, it doesn't seem to track, really. Like, in the classroom is so different from what they teach as theory.
Yeah, I mean, even as a theory, it's incredibly racist.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the fact that it doesn't even work is icing on the cake.
Yeah, no, it's the same. But the thing is, like, it's been the same since the 60s. Like, it hasn't been the same. They've changed things, but the mindset is the same, basically. Like, we're going to tackle racism through anti-racism. It's been like that for 50, 60 years. And it's very infuriating, because I reject the whole framework, and I tell people I reject the framework, and then people are like, well, then should you even be in the program? And I'm like, I think I should.
Okay. Yeah. Are you able to figure out who you can rely on, or are there other people in the program that, even if quiet, are skeptical of this stuff? And are you able to kind of give people bravery and set an example of a heterodox thinker, which would be something that one would hope is important in a teaching school or in an education environment?
I I can. So there are a couple of people. It's not very many, but there are a couple of people who see things the way that I do. And I can tell based on, like, it's hard with the masks, but like you can see in their eyes that they're like skeptical, you know. Mm-hmm. Most people, I would say, don't really care and are just trying to get a job. I mean, it's not that they're not passionate, but they're passionate about the kids. They may not really care for their area of content. They don't really care for the bureaucracy of it either, but they're just trying to get through it. And then there is that subset that's like maybe a quarter of my classes where they are very like gung-ho and like, oh yeah, this is all great, blah, blah, blah. But they actually, so there are professors that, my internship supervisor actually is one that really values the fact that I'm heterodox. And she doesn't seem like she's very heterodox herself, but she sees in me that, first of all, I know my stuff. And so there's no way I can get dinged on any of that. She also knows my whole powerful trans story, whatever, like how I'm detransitioning, how I was like fucked over by doctors and stuff. And she feels a great degree of sympathy for me. But I think she also sees that I am, that I do look at the world in a very different way from her generation, because she's a lot older than me. That might be more in line with how younger kids think of things, because I'm also a digital native and everything like that. Yeah. But then there are other professors that, like, I've had one just not accept my work. Because most of the work that I'm given is not written by these professors. It's written by the state. And the assignments are like they'll give you a certain selection of readings and then ask you why those readings are good, but they won't let you criticize at all. So they'll ask, like, what are the best practices for this particular type of education? But if you say, well, these are the best practices, but there's also these critiques of it and suggestions that maybe this model is outdated and shouldn't be used, they don't accept that. Not every professor, but some professors are just like, that's not the assignment.
Yeah. So. A friend of mine, Paul Rossi, I always get corrected no matter what I say. But I'm talking to a teacher, so you're probably, you'll know when to correct me, when not to. When to let things slide. He talks about the difference between, he was an educator. He kind of got thwarted by the dogmatism that was going on in the school that he was working in, and he called it out and then was pushed out after that. But he draws a distinction between, I guess, seducing and educing. And what you're describing to me right now sounds like seduction, not education or eduction. It's about, this is how we're going to do things, rather than how do things happen? How do we do things? What makes something good? What makes something bad? And if you're saying that this has been going on forever, are you necessarily like, do you think would you consider yourself, sorry to use this terminology, like black-pilled about the U.S. public education, or at least your state's education? Is there hope? Are you pessimistic, optimistic, and are you still dedicated to this project? And do you have any insight into how parents, students, and educators can change things for the better? I'm not totally black-pilled. In some of the Twitter circles I run in, there's a lot of people that are just like, homeschool your kids, and it's like I'm not going to say that's a bad idea right now. I have a lot of respect for parents that do that, because things are worse than they've been and for a long time.
but it's not like long term. That's not sustainable. Like that's just not going to happen. I also am wary of like calls to just close down public education entirely, because then that opens the door for like corporate schools, and that is probably less democratic than what we have now, even though what we have now is like pretty bad. So I'm not totally black-pilled on it. I think that there are virtues to public education that are specific to public education, but I also understand that my role is to reproduce whatever the state ideology is. I guess my only hope is that the state ideology will one day be something more human than what it is right now.
That's a really interesting framework. That's harkens back to how I ended up getting into this whole mess in business. What do you mean by human? More human, less human?
More human meaning like not categorizing people in like rigid groups. I think that's one thing I'm hoping for, and also not pushing all this equity stuff either, because it's like not that I think like social equality is like a bad thing necessarily, but like it's very much like cutting the tall trees for the sake of instead of like raising everybody, it's just about like undercutting the people at the top. Which as a high achieving student I have a big problem with, because I was going through that when I was in high school. But I think I don't really, I've been thinking about like what possible solutions there could be, but I haven't come to any lately. Like not lately, but like in general, I haven't been in the system long enough to understand how all the power networks work. So I don't have any solutions.
You don't have any solutions as of this date?
Not right now. Yeah, not right now.
Well, you are high achieving students. I'm sure you're going to come up with some. But that metaphor about the cutting the trees, because I've heard that before. I was just thinking, like, my imagination was just like, okay, every time they try to cut the trees to level things, they never are able to get to the terrain itself. Is always like the unevenness of the terrain in and of itself is never landscaped unless they just burn everything down. But even then, it just it's a stupid metaphor, but inequality or not unfairness, but inequality is, there's so many different levels to it that you tack one, you create a whole bunch of other things, and they can never, it doesn't seem to me that the people who promote this idea either have the frame of mind or the cognitive capacity to actually understand how complex the world is. But that's me being rather prideful in saying that, but it's just been my experience.
Yeah, the way that it's worked out, basically is like they make things harder for the gifted students and they make things easier for the like the remedial students, but like they don't do it in a way that actually like builds skills. They're sort of taking away skills that would be useful to the gifted kids by forcing them to like comply to very rigid instructions and to do all kinds of like creative quote unquote projects that don't really like add anything to their education. Like it's just so easy for them that they breeze by it and don't even pay attention. And then they end up getting bad grades because they don't put any heart in it at all. And then and they don't get taught the study skills that gifted kids really, really need in order to succeed in life, because most of the time, like, they don't need to study up to a certain point. And then once they start to need to study, they don't know how to. And that's when they collapse. So for the gifted kids, like, it's just making everything harder because they have to comply to a way of thinking that isn't conducive to their success. Yeah,
it's the Harrison Bergeron, but with a ceiling. So they're slowed down, and they're like, okay, go forth. And then, I don't know how to use I don't know what to do.
Yeah. And then for the kids that are at the absolute bottom, the way that they make it easier isn't by, encouraging them to do better, or, like, it's not anything like that. It's like, okay, you're at this level. We're just gonna like pass you through, basically. Like, you're too old to be in this class, but you never learned anything, so I have no choice but to let you go through. Even if you totally failed, you're just gonna keep going. And sometimes they take away work, which I guess in some cases might be okay, but when you take away that work, they're not building those skills. And they also like choose to use like increasingly less complex texts in order to read. I had one teacher say to me, like, I asked him, like, because he was teaching a bunch of freshmen. I was like, well, why is their final project just a 1-page paper? Like, shouldn't it be like 2 or 3 at least, you know, like something a little bit more complicated? And he said, yeah, these kids can barely read. Like, I have some 14-year-olds that read at like a 3rd grade level. And I'm like, okay, but shouldn't you be working with them on that? And like giving them things to read, like assigning readings? And he's like, well, they would fail it, so I'm not going to do that. And it's like, but how are they supposed to do better if they don't fail? You know, like, how are not like, I mean, obviously if they fail, they're going to fail, but how are they supposed to do better if they don't even get the chance to try? You know? And so that's how, there was one girl, while I was subbing, she told me she was 15, 16, and she told me she didn't know how to divide. Like, at all. She didn't know how to divide whatsoever. And there's a calculus class, actually, of kids that don't know how to long divide by hand, because they have calculators and everything. But the teacher at that time, she just laughed it off, and she didn't show them how to do it. You know? So it's pretty bad. Yeah.
And even if one teacher takes it upon themselves to do the hard work of teaching the kids and figuring out how to deal with the bureaucracy and then the kids, I mean, I just don't see anybody without institutional support lasting too long with all the work. And then the attitudes on top of that. And then, like, I've spoken with some people, we don't have to go in that direction, but you have administrators and certain, you know, higher ups in these education departments adopting this equity stuff, which covers their asses from actually having to, like, face the consequences of what they're actually doing to these children. I mean, they don't get to fail. They don't fail in school, so the school's past them, but they fail in life, and the school's not on the hook for the lives lost or the opportunities that are lost going forward. So
it's really and it got worse with COVID too, because all the kids basically lost 2 years of instruction. Even this year was kind of a flop. And they've all done like in person this year, but it's not good. And then you also have a lot of teachers that just don't show up anymore because they're like, well, I had COVID and I don't feel like coming in. I'm scared. And there are a lot of ones that focus so much on the masks, like making sure that it's over the nose and everything, that the instruction is just totally lost. The kids are super addicted to their phones now, to the point that it's discouraged to try to take them away. Most of the time, if I'm subbing, like, I have the urge to want to take their phone, but I'm like, I'm a sub, I'm not going to like get involved in that. But like most of the time I will see them, like, they'll have Netflix open while they're writing an essay, and they're just like consuming mass amounts of media in the middle of class. It's insane to me, but they get the pass because they're like, well, if I take it away, they're going to be grumpy. They're going to be like, you know, they're not going to like want to sit there. They're not going to pay attention. They're going to fall asleep, whatever. Like, so it's just it's a crutch. It's bad. Like, it's pretty bleak right now.
Oh man.
But I have hope. That's the job I see ahead of me. I have some hope that maybe I'll be able to at least prepare some kids to do better. No.
I don't know if you want to go in the original direction we were going, but bringing up being a gifted or high achiever, if you identify as gifted, or if you want to talk through that. I'm just wondering, some of my good friends, Sasha Ayad and Stella O'Malley, have spoken about the crossover with gender and intelligence and high intelligence, and then how that interfaces with some of the phenomena around gender dysphoria and I guess gender obsession even in certain cases. I was wondering if you want to speak to that and or just tell your story on that front.
I've told my story before. I can go in that front. I can definitely go on the intelligence front. I've never been IQ tested or anything like that, but my parents were as part of the immigration process.
Oh.
'Cause they're from Eastern Europe, and they came in the 90s. And they scored highly. I think I don't know what exactly their scores were, but it was 130 plus. So I don't know what mine is or my brother's, but we're both probably in that range. Our families were both intelligentsia and whatever, so it's pretty clear what was going on there. But I got what I did get done later as an adult. Right before I transitioned, actually, I got diagnosed with autism, I don't know, like, I haven't read too much. I've read a lot of papers, but I don't feel confident citing any of them off the top of my head. But from experience, one of the pitfalls with having that kind of intelligence and especially because a lot of my interests were text-based. Like, I loved reading a lot. And I still do like a lot of Wikipedia wormholes and just obsessive researching and anything that I get interested in. Like, I have a lot of like OCD-ish tendencies, like very, very serious ones where I just sort of get lost in whatever I'm doing. I used to have very complex rituals to protect myself at night. I had numerous very fantastical fears about dying in my sleep when I was like 6 or 7 years old. I was worried I was going to get murdered. I was worried a ghost was going to kill me. I was worried that I would choke to death on my own vomit. I was worried that I would get carbon monoxide poisoning. And so I would, depending on what I was afraid of that night, I would like position my body differently. Hopefully I wouldn't die. I would cover my head with blankets. I would, keep a bucket by the side of the bed in case I had to vomit. And I was terrified of vomiting too. That was also the thing. Like, that lasted years. But
have you embraced that? I still have a problem with that. I don't like it.
I don't embrace it. But it was like a pathological kind of, like constantly afraid. Any upset stomach I ever had, if I ever ate too much, if I ever just had gas or anything, like, it was always on my mind, and it caused a lot of anxiety, and no one took me seriously. But I was hypochondriac too. I was a very big hypochondriac. I convinced myself I had all kinds of maladies all the time, even before I was exposed to the internet. Like, I convinced myself I had ringworm. I thought I had cancer at one point. I was like 9 years old or something. And I had a very active imagination too, a very, very active imagination. I used to, something that I had been doing up until recently actually was coming up with like random fantasy worlds. Like, I would draw on a map. I would draw on a piece of paper, like a map by hand, like freehand, of different continents, and I would slowly carve them up into countries, and I would start writing a history of that particular world. And it was always like based in human history, so I was always like focused on like, okay, well, they're shipping these arms over here and whatever, and this is their ideology over here. Like, I was very careful in how I did that. I would spend hours doing this too. I used to, at other jobs, I would like kill time by doing that. I would have pages and pages of like just bulleted years of what was going on. And that was also obsessive to a certain degree, because I wouldn't stop myself. So all of that to say that the connection with gender, like, once puberty hit, I was miserable. I was really miserable because my body was changing. It was a very rapid change. Obviously you hit puberty and you notice things happening to you. and it's scary, but it was especially scary to me because I was like already afraid that I was sick all the time, and then all of a sudden my body hurt, my voice was deepening, hair was growing in places, and I felt awkward because everyone's awkward at that age. But I was also sorry, thought sort of something else that's going to happen a few times, or I'm just going to sort of like space out and forget what track I'm on, but
it's fine.
But yeah, so the very active imagination, scared of puberty, scared of sexuality too, and not really knowing, and especially partially because of the autism thing, like when you know, like, and not to be crude about it, but like you remember like when you were a teenager and you were getting like random boners and stuff, like it was hard for me to tell the difference, like between like, am I aroused or is this just that, you know? It was incredibly hard, and that scared the hell out of me because I was like, does this mean that I'm attracted to this? Does it mean that I'm doing this? Does it mean, you know, whatever. I always felt a lot of guilt and a lot of shame about just that happening, you know. It was I had no control over it, but I felt like I was a bad person every time it happened. I've also been like a self-punisher, like a self-flagellator, like my entire life. I've always punished myself for like bad thoughts and whatever. I was convinced, at first, I had a religious background. I still am religious, but I was convinced that God could hear my thoughts, and that he was always listening to me. And then slowly I started to be convinced that other people could hear my thoughts, and that's why they weren't being nice to me. I was worried that I was thinking so hard that other people could see it in my face what I was thinking. Like that's more akin to not like a telepathic thing, but just like because other people had this ability to read faces that I couldn't. Yeah. And so like that really high capacity for imagination, once you couple that with like all the shame of like shame and fear around puberty and like your, you know, body changing, and then sexuality gets thrown in the mix. I had a girlfriend when I was 14. We broke up after a couple weeks. I was heartbroken, like completely heartbroken. I was smitten over this girl for like 2 years, and then I met another girl, and we started dating, and that relationship lasted until the pandemic, so very long time. But like, you know, getting over there scared again too, because this was also when like the whole pop feminism thing was happening, where I guess I'm like going into my story a little bit, but like there was a lot of stuff said about men and masculinity and how it's toxic and all of this stuff. And I took all of that to heart because I didn't want to hurt anybody. I was convinced from childhood that I was a really bad person for thoughts that I couldn't control, for parts of my body I couldn't control. And I convinced myself that very innocuous masculine traits that I was just developing were signs of moral failure, of misogyny, of patriarchy, whatever. And so I started to really resent my body as it was. And I also didn't recognize my body as it was. Like I had no stability there. It was hard to see myself in the mirror as the person that I was. And I didn't really have a reason to be like that necessarily. I was chubby as a kid, and people did make fun of me for it, but I got older and I became very athletic. And you know, in hindsight, I realized that there were a lot of girls that were flirting with me, and I didn't realize that they were flirting with me. So I didn't realize that I was supposed to be the one taking action because I thought that was the bad thing, you know? And I follow rules very literally too. I don't allow for any sort of, you know, there's not really any sort of wiggle room. I don't think about it as it would make sense. I think about it as, okay, well, this is the instruction. I have to do as the instruction says. So all of that, like, you know, and realizing like, okay, men bad, what, not realizing, but being told men bad and all this and whatever, like led to a lot of ideation about like, it would probably be better if I was a girl, in all honesty, because then I could go and do certain things that I can't do as a guy, and no one's going to think that I'm creepy. No one's going to think that I'm weird. No one's going to think that I'm, you know, all these things that I don't want to be and don't actually think of myself as, but this voice in my head keeps telling me that I am, and whatever. So that was part of it. And then a lot of it, you know, with the sexuality, with the autogynephilia aspect, like, because you're able to sustain very powerful, like, imaginary situations in your head, like you're able to embody other characters, you're able to mirror other people to kind of a disturbing level. Like one thing I do sometimes, and I do this unconsciously, I start taking on other people's accents as I'm speaking to them, their own affectations and stuff. I start mirroring their behaviors, and I try to like put on the same face as they do. And some people say that that's a sign of narcissism, but it's also a sign of autism, because if you don't know how to express your own emotions, you want to express the, like, if you don't know how, like, because your face never really matches your emotional state. So you want to make sure that you're on the same level with somebody else. You want to be personable, whatever. And some autistic people, some autistic advocates say that that's masking and you shouldn't have to do that. And it's like, well, you kind of do, because other people think you're weird if you don't. So, but at any rate, I had, with all that, with the sexual stuff, like once you get into the mindset, I don't want to be in the body that I am. I wish I were this other body. Like you start to want to, you know, even in the bedroom, be that person. Like that's what your fantasies start to go towards. And I remember a very early situation with pornography, and this was also part of it. But I don't think, I want to be clear here, I don't think that pornography itself causes this. I think there is a latent, I think at one point that I said I did, but I think that there is a latent capacity to develop it, like issues like this, that pornography can maybe trigger, but I don't think that in itself, or accelerate, yeah. But I don't think in itself it causes it, because there are plenty of people that use porn constantly and they don't end up thinking like this. You know, they don't end up like, you know, autoangiophiles or autogynephiles or whatever. They don't end up like that. They have weird fetishes themselves, but it's usually not like this. I remember when I was like 9 or so, and I saw a picture of a woman on all fours, like a model. And my first like it aroused me on like not realizing what that was or anything. And my first instinct was to assume the same position she was in. That was the first thought that I had, and so I did, and I was like, I don't get it, and I never got it. I never really got it, but that was the first time that anything like that had ever happened. And then, you know, as I grew up and learned more about what sex was and whatever, like it was scary to think about, and then being told like all these like horrible things about men, like sexual crimes and whatever, like not wanting to associate myself with any of that at all. Like I really did like start to think like it probably would be better if I was a woman, because then I wouldn't have to, like, that's, I don't want to hurt anyone. And it seems that from what I'm being told, women don't have the capacity to hurt anyone like that. So that was my big fear, right? And so you think of yourself a certain way, you think of yourself like that, and it extends to partners and stuff, like having one thing with autists that somebody, I forget who, but it was a therapist, it was one of the Twitter therapists you mentioned, I think, I forget who exactly, but mentioned that autistic people have high affective empathy, like they're able to feel what other people are feeling, not actually feel what other people are feeling, but like when they mirror another person, they start to feel the same feelings that other person feels, like emotionally, basically. But they have very low cognitive empathy. So they're unable to take themselves and place them in the same situation with all the context as someone else. They're not able to make that connection. And that was going on with me, and with my partner too, because my partner was also autistic and she was also autoandrophilic to a certain extent. And she, like we both found each other's like reactions during sex very arousing, but we like wanted to mimic each other. You know, I don't know, like if that and the reason
sounds like a very strange feedback loop.
Yeah, it was, and it was not a good one.
I mean, strange, not as in yeah. I mean, strange like as in the strange loop kind of thing.
Yeah,
but it's probably got strange.
I don't think it's inherently bad. There are definitely plenty of people like that, but it is a strange loop. Where I think the way that it works basically is that you like see how much the other person is enjoying it, and you want to feel how they're feeling, right? And that's how it was going between the both of us. She was also trans for a while. She was for about 2 years in high school. She identified as a trans man. She changed her name. She changed her clothes. She cut her hair off. Everything. She changed her pronouns. All of that. But then she desisted after a while. And you know, I wasn't like. I didn't think it was like a cool thing or anything. I saw she was struggling. I also didn't really believe her that she was actually a man, which is strange to think about because only like a couple years later, like I started identifying as a woman. I started being like non-binary or whatever. But I didn't really believe her because I was like, well, you're still my girlfriend. You still act like a girl. You're still, you know. And I think eventually she just like got more comfortable with herself and everything. She had to go through a lot of therapeutic support and whatever difficult situation. But, like I don't think she realized, you know, I don't know. I can't speak to that, but I don't think that she really thought about her experience versus my experience as much. I think she took it very literally. And even though I obviously took it very literally. I thought I was literally becoming a woman. That was on my mind a lot. And it was only after I had medically transitioned that I realized I couldn't. But were you given access to specialized support with regard to gender and autism at the same time while you're going through this gender transition? Are you somebody helping you with your autism or showing you how things are working and how you're thinking? Did you have a sounding board at all? No, none. I had a lot of trouble with therapists. I went through like a lot of therapists. The first one, I didn't know what to do in therapy. And I felt like I couldn't talk about stuff at home at all for complicated reasons. But it just wasn't doing anything for me. And then the second therapist, we talked about stuff at home, but then he was like, let's get your mom in here. And things went downhill from there, really downhill, because there were some things that like I was hyperbolizing, I was exaggerating, catastrophizing, whatever. But then there were other things that were true that I was saying that were red flags, and they were just denied completely, and I was just made to be crazy and whatever. then in college, I had like a revolving door of counselors at the university counseling department, and none of them really helped with any. They didn't diagnose me with anything. They didn't they gave me a book here and there, but I didn't read. I was just in my room drinking a lot, yeah, college not good. I was also in a cult. I should mention that, but I love mentioning that.
Okay. Was it what flavor, if I may ask?
Communist.
Oh, okay.
Well, like communist, but like Black Lives Matter-y kind of type. Okay. Yeah, not good.
So you were militantly woke then?
Yes. Okay. Very much so. Oh. Very much so. But the trans thing was not as central to it. Okay. It was central to me, but it wasn't central to the group at large. Yeah.
Was it connected? Was the gender stuff connected to the social activism, communism stuff? Or just did you keep them apart?
They were. I did think of them as being together, but I also didn't think that it was that important. Like I talked a lot about like trans liberation and whatever, but I didn't see it as the core of my ideology. It was sort of just like one other thing. Like it was just one identity group out of many that were going to benefit from whatever it was that we believed in.
Is there a word for that? I'm writing a rock opera about a similar cult, so I'm always looking for a new language to describe this utopia or eschaton.
We didn't really have a name for it. It wasn't one thing. There was one girl that called it Black radicalism. There was one person that was like anarcho-syndicalist. There was another that was a social democrat. We didn't give a shit. We didn't give a shit. It was just all that mattered was that you were in the in group and everybody else was the out group. And if you were in the in group, you had to follow the rules. And if you didn't, you were in the out group.
Harkening back to what you were saying about rules, what I've noticed is that it can be the case that these rules in social activism can change overnight. And if you're being very literal with rules, how did you did the rules change? And how did you know what the rules were? Were they written, unwritten? How did you navigate something that was so strict with such a literal mindset? And was that perhaps a growth opportunity for you to kind of figure out implied and explicit meanings and stuff?
It was mostly unwritten. We had written out like processes for how to handle like interpersonal issues or whatever. And those were explicitly written, but it was basically just like mob rule. Like as long as you have enough people on your side, you will win. Like, and we had like a restorative justice process, and that was basically what I described, but there was no off-ramp for it. Like if you were called before like a restorative justice hearing, you were you were guilty by accusation, and there was really no way to like get you back in other than constantly testing you to see whether you agreed with the consensus. And no one ever got let back in once they got accused. Wow. But the unwritten part of it was the hierarchy of who could call these meetings. And that was basically like you needed to be the most marginalized, or you had to have like a pretty strong,
coalition charisma.
Yeah. You also had to be charismatic. That was the other thing. But the big thing was like you needed to have as many identities tacked onto you as possible.
Yeah.
And it was very explicitly racialist. Like that was the big thing. Like a white person had no standing no matter what. Like even though I was a trans woman, I was still marginalized for being white. And not that like any of that matters, because trans women whatever. But like even within that woke sphere, it didn't matter because being brown or black mattered more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part that was unwritten, was where exactly those lines were. But basically, like, if you were a woman and you weren't white, you could get away with anything. Like, that was the whole thing. So you needed to be a woman, you needed to be a person of color, you needed to be queer. But I also was there, and I was introducing the idea, because I was still skeptical of queer stuff, even though I was trans. I was like, well, it's LGBT. There's not anything more than that. What are you talking about, you know? And so I sort of introduced the idea, like, if you aren't actually, like, gay, if you aren't actually, like, in a relationship with somebody of the same sex, then maybe you shouldn't have access to that queer label, or if you're not trans, too. But, you know, and all of that was just, like, through discussion, we hashed all that out. We didn't actually write any of this down because... well, you know, it would have been, it would have made us realize what exactly we were doing. But it was also, we had written it down sort of in a different way, where it was more vague, where it was like, the personal is political. Like, that was one of our doctrines, was like anything that happened between two people had to involve the whole group.
Mm-hmm.
Basically. And you couldn't trust any outside institutions whatsoever. You couldn't trust the police, you couldn't trust like other campus administrators, you couldn't trust even people outside the group. You couldn't trust them because they weren't as revolutionary, they weren't as visionary, they were you know, they were agents of the state, they were agents of the whatever. So like, it was a very paranoid thing too, and really, like, all the people that you trusted with all your secrets and all your, you know, on a very personal level, like, the people that you spent all your time with were also the only police there, you know, like, so, and there was no hierarchy, there was no official hierarchy.
So
it was,
no official accountability either.
No, none. And even though there was no official hierarchy, we still all gravitated towards, like, the same three people, one of whom was literally just a narcissist, like raging narcissist, and absolutely terrible person. But I was very close to her. I was in her orbit because I gravitate towards that personality. It's very easy to keep me under the wing, because if someone tests me over and over and over again, I just end up continuing to want to prove my loyalty. Okay,
yeah. And then what you were talking about effective empathy from the autistic or autist point of view, does that have some sort of like chemical reaction or some sort of molecular bonding with the narcissist's desire to be affirmed? So is that another strange loop or a feat?
Yes, absolutely. My not just with this girl, but also with my ex-girlfriend, that feedback loop was there. We also both turned each other into narcissists, because, like, we would, like, if at any point there was, like, a negative emotion, it was the other person's responsibility or it was their fault. Either way, like, you know, and that was also largely unconscious, too. Like, that wasn't something we were aware of at any point. It was just sort of like, I see this person that I care about hurting very badly, and it's hard for me to think through in a rational way why they might be feeling that bad and whether it might actually be their own fault that they feel that way. You know, so there were a lot of instances, or whether they even had a right to feel that way in the first place. Like, you know, I don't know. There were a lot of instances where, like, I'll give one example because it was the most ridiculous one. There was a girl that was in the cult that lived with the leader of the cult. The leader of the cult was a Muslim woman, and she didn't drink. And the girl that was living with her was like your average sort of like college student, right? And she was like a white passing Latina, was the way that we were told to talk about her after the fact. Before that, she was a brown woman, but after the fact, she was white. Mm-hmm. So what happened was, like, it was this girl's birthday, and she had just turned 21, so she wanted to drink in the room. And the leader of the cult was like, you can't drink in the common area. You can't leave any alcohol in the common area because I don't want to see that. So the girl was like, okay, sure. But she ended up getting drunk in her room and left a shot glass on the common counter. When the leader of the cult came out in the morning and saw it there and could smell the alcohol on it, because she literally picked it up and smelled it just to check, I guess, she freaked out and said that this was an attack on Muslim women, on brown women. It's from this white passing Latina. I need backup here. We need to, like, call her out. We need to have a restorative justice process. This is ridiculous. She lied to me. All of this. And I went there with a couple of girls that were also in the cult, that were also very prone to being manipulated by narcissists. Some of them had narcissistic parents. Some of them had narcissistic exes. So it was all girls that were very, like, vulnerable to that kind of, mentality. And we just, like, yelled through this girl's door for, like, a good couple hours. And she ended up moving out the very next morning, to someone else's dorm, and we never heard from her again. But, like, even in that moment, like, none of us thought through, like, that's kind of fucking ridiculous. Like, she just left a shot glass out there. What are you talking about? Like, you were actually insane. Like, none of us could think like that, because we saw how upset this woman was, and we saw how, and we attached it to our very complicated ideology. And we were like, okay, well, this is an injustice that can't stand, and we had no sympathy for the girl. Whatsoever. We had no, like,
she was now part of the out group, so
yeah, exactly. So situations like that happen frequently, and I also, I had my own fair share of stuff like that. I'm not gonna talk about that because I'm not like that anymore, but I've done stuff like that too. I've done that within the cult. I've done that with my ex. I've done that with my parents too. Like, it. But it is always that feedback loop. It is always that feedback loop. It's very rarely just one person. With the cult, it was one person. it was kind of just one person. But it's still, like, you end up with a narcissist. You become like a mini narcissist yourself. Especially if you do have that kind of affective empathy, and if you're mirroring their behavior too. And not just mirroring their behavior because you want their validation. You're mirroring them because you literally don't know how to interact socially without doing that. It did teach me a valuable lesson after I had been kicked out. That
I was going to ask how you left, but I
was forced out. Yeah. That's also a very complicated story in its own right, but I ended up living in a house with like 5 or 6 girls that were all in a cult as well, and I had run away from home and whatnot, and didn't have anywhere else to be. I was very severely traumatized. I guess not severely, but I had PTSD. Like, I had very, very bad PTSD. I was having, like, weekly flashbacks. I was smoking a lot of weed. I was having psychotic episodes. I was unable to regulate my mood. I was working a lot. I was not sleeping. I was, like, working full time and going to school full time. I was not sleeping.
Had you transitioned at this point?
Not yet. Not yet. That didn't happen yet.
So you don't have, like, an extra battery of hormone replacement therapy going on at the same time?
No. If it had been going on at the same time, it would have been way worse. It would have been way worse. My sensitivity to drugs went down in, like, a lot after I got on hormones. and also like it made me very depressive. So I didn't have the energy to be working and going to school and whatever. But I had socially transitioned at that point. I had started to tell people to call me like by my feminine name and whatever. Yeah, but I got kicked out because I was a messy roommate, basically. But they made it seem like I had racially abused one of our friends, and they wouldn't tell me who that friend was, and I wasn't allowed to talk about it with anybody. And it turned out after the fact that no one outside of the house actually knew that I was part of a restorative justice hearing. They just thought I dropped off the face of the planet, which was insane. But I was under watch. They segregated me from the rest of the house. I had the whole top floor to myself, but I had no stove. I had no washing machine. I had no dishwasher. I had like half a counter. I still had a fridge. I still had a sink, but I had to like buy my own equipment for cooking and stuff and whatever. I wasn't allowed to go downstairs for any reason. And they even put up a curtain by the back stairwell so that they wouldn't have to see me while walking upstairs and downstairs. Okay. And you know, I wasn't allowed to talk to any of them. I was told that if I followed whatever it was that my handler was telling me to do, then eventually after a couple months we could all be friends again. It would all be fine, like water under the bridge, whatever. And I believed that, and I was desperate to believe that because I had no friends outside of the school. I had one friend actually. She was a really sweet person that helped me through a lot of that. She let me stay at her house a lot while going through that. But outside of her, like I didn't have anybody else. I had my ex who was hours away, and she broke up with me in the meantime, but still wanted to have sex with me and whatever. So that was also bad. And I didn't have family. I didn't really have any of that. So I was very desperate for, that promise that we would be friends again. And I ended up, the summer passed and I got told, so when are you going to look for new apartments? Because the new semester's starting and we want a new roommate. They didn't even none of that was discussed. No one, they even explicitly told me we're not kicking you out of the house at first. And then all of a sudden I had 2 weeks to find a new apartment. So I found one. I blew all my savings on it, and eventually I ended up moving back with my grandparents because that was also a trip in itself. But
how did you begin to find a center or start to understand that you're getting caught in these untenable relationships and these abusive and unstable, destructive relationships? The first major wake-up call was maybe a month after I got kicked out. I realized, they were just lying to me. It never occurred to me that anyone would just lie about that, especially not people I was so close to, but it kicked in that they lied to me. I demanded money. I demanded that they give me altogether, all 8 of them or whatever, because there were 2 other people involved too. I asked for $1,500 to cover some of the expenses, to cover the new lease, whatever. That's not even the amount that I actually lost, but I asked for some, and I had that was all the money I had, straight up all the money I had. So I asked them for that, and some of them felt bad and they gave me some of it. We're still friends today, but then others were just no, fuck you. You're this racist coward or whatever. And that was when I was I'm actually, there is a reason human beings get angry. It's okay to be angry in this situation. It's actually okay to be angry in this situation. This was actually I was harmed, and it was because of this fucked up ideology that they were all following. And it was completely unjust, and it was just totally abusive. So that was the first realization of that. And then I had already had issues with my parents, but I didn't fully explore that yet. And I didn't finally recognize
the pattern itself until maybe a year after my ex and I stopped talking altogether. Because then that was when I was like, okay, so because that was harder, because it was like she wasn't totally at fault and I wasn't totally at fault, and the way that we talked about each other back and forth towards the end, like it was clear that we were both projecting a lot onto each other. And that was when I started to think, okay, so this is the dynamic as it exists. It is that feedback loop of expecting the other person's validation to fill something that you don't have, like hoping that they being happy will make you happy, even if they're feeding off of you at that point. So yeah, that was when I finally, so that was probably like late 2020, early 2021. And then I had started to, that was also when I had like worked things out with parents and everything, like, and then things are fine with family now, but then midway through 2021, like maybe May, was when I started to think, oh, the trans thing might not be working out too good.
And on what level did you first become aware of it? The physical side of it, or the psychological side, or the ideological side?
It was kind of all at once. Maybe not all at once, but ideologically, I had already distanced myself from the overall movement. I wanted nothing to do with anything left wing at that point. I didn't want to consider myself like a member of the left or whatever. So I just, and as far as like how I viewed transgenderism generally, like I was like, of all the things, it's not important, and I don't necessarily care if trans people get left behind politically, because it's such a small group of people that it just doesn't matter. Like that was my mindset going into 2021, or even basically as soon as the pandemic started, like that was starting to be my mindset, where I was like, I just don't fucking care, like whatever, I just want to live, but I also don't care if I personally get left behind or whatever. And then slowly I was convincing myself of a lot. So at first, when I had originally started transitioning, I was like, I can just be a woman, whatever. I didn't have any sort of like grounding in like what would make me true trans necessarily. I was just like, I'm trans because I'm sad about being a guy. Like that was like as far as it went. And then at that, like in once 2020 started, like my thinking had changed to there's some sort of hormonal issue in my brain that is making me trans. Like my brain is female and my body is male. Like that was what I was thinking, because I actually had taken well to hormones. Like it wasn't upsetting to me. I was very depressive. I was crying a lot, but I was very grateful for that release because it was helping a lot with PTSD. I had a lot less anger. I was a lot happier about that. I appreciated like not having to be as physical to get my stress out. Just a lot of stuff like that. And I was also happy my libido was going down too, because that was also like something I struggled with a lot. Like I hated having a sex drive. And obviously that's not a healthy way to deal with it. But I hate it all. I was doing okay with them, right? And so I figured like, okay, well, if I'm doing okay with them, then I must actually be trans or whatever. And I had a friend that was a trans man, and he detransitioned over the course that we spoke, and we're still friends, but we don't talk as much. But that was my first like real exposure to like, oh, people detransition. Was seeing it happen in front of me with this person that I had met, and you know, we talked a lot about our issues, and the more that we talked, I was thinking about it. Our experiences weren't one-to-one, but there were a lot of overlaps that I was surprised about. Like she was a butch lesbian, and she was really, like, you know, she was from a bad family, and et cetera, et cetera. She ended up doing a lot of, you know, drugs and whatnot, and lived on the run, and et cetera, et cetera. And she was also in a left-wing cult at some point. So there were parallels, and then there weren't. And, you know, I thought about it, but I didn't apply it to myself yet. But it was something that I had been thinking about. And then I started to like very seriously like read all the research and whatever, and I kept running up against like all these different and varying like esoteric explanations from like Julia Serrano and like a bunch of other trans woman neurologists, that, you know, they were coming up with research that didn't reflect reality, and came and had so many different like etiologies for what makes someone trans. Mm-hmm. And so I started like reading other things. I started reading like gender critical stuff. I started reading like radical feminist stuff, but this was also very not what I wanted to read, because they hated men so much, and they hated trans women specifically so much, that like I would start crying reading it. Like I would literally start crying reading it, because I was like, I'm not doing, like, straight up, I was like, I'm not doing this to get into the women's room. I'm not doing this to prey on women. I'm not doing this to prey on children. I'm just, you know, I feel like there's something wrong with me, you know, and I'm trying to fix it, and I don't know what the answer is, you know. So it was very distressing to read some of that stuff, and not because, you know, not because those people don't exist, but because they were like, a lot of the sentiment was basically like, if you are like this, then you are this, and you need to be held to account for that. And, you know, I was just confused, you know. I was like 15 when I started identifying as trans. Like, I'm not, you know, and I was 20 when I started medically transitioning, but I was like, at the point where I started medically transitioning was within a couple of weeks of being kicked out of that cult. So it was at a very stressful time in my, I was not.
And you were diagnosed with autism at the same time.
And I was diagnosed with autism at the same time. So it was all of that. Yeah, it was a lot of things. And my ex didn't help either. 'Cause she, you know, she had been identifying as a lesbian for some time at that point, but obviously if she's having sex with a man for many years, questionable, because it was enthusiastic too. She, you know, we made a lot of promises to each other because we had been together for so long. We were like, we're going to get married. We're going to have kids. We're going to live in a cottage. We're going to do all this. And that was keeping me going for a time. And then, you know, she was like, well, I don't really want to be in a relationship, but can we be friends with benefits? And I was like, because I had no one else, you know, she was my rock. I was like, okay. You know, and she, like, once I had started transitioning, like, she sexualized the hell out of it. Like, she was really handsy. She was, you know, that was not a good time for me either. But, no, it was, so that was happening. And I felt a pressure, like, okay, well, if you're a lesbian, then I have to be a woman if we are going to be together. Not that I was questioning that I was a woman at the time, but that pressure made it impossible for me to see anything else. And so I think in order for me to have detransitioned, I would have had to have broken up with her in the first place. But, so, I mean, that did happen, so fortunately, but at any rate,
so if you're going through you're relating to me a number of different avenues that you're going down that you're questioning, and ways of thinking that you're questioning about the world, about politics, about yourself, about gender, about relationships, about family, all this stuff's being questioned. Where do you get to a point where you begin to see how to establish a positive identity and a positive ideology or a positive belief system? Where do you start to find truth that you can start to build or rebuild on?
I started, sorry, I realized I just sounded so manic there. That last rant.
No.
My bad. No.
That's right.
When it came to trying to find the truth, my first positive identity for myself was like once I had started transitioning, like that was when I chose to turn my whole life around and be a more positive person and be a better person and try to do better for myself and not let myself slip through the cracks and everything. So that initial point of transition, like I can't say I regret those 2 years or so, like 2 years and like a half or so. I can't, because it, like, trying to form that identity of the woman that I'm not made me, like, it made me want to be a better person. Like, it made me finally stop making excuses for myself. I was like, okay, you finally got what you want. You have, like, now you have responsibilities, like, you know. And I was convinced prior to transition that I was going to kill myself if I didn't transition. So once I did transition, I was like, okay, well, now I can live the rest of my life. Right. That was what I was going through. And that's where that started, that positive identity for myself, even though it was not real, even though it was premised on a lie. Even though it was premised on a lie, it let me start to heal, kind of. Like, it really did let me start to heal, because before that, my entire life was pain about being born in the wrong body. Okay, well, now I'm not born in the wrong body. No, let's move on. And that was when I started. And you know, the fact that all that stuff happened at the same time meant that I had started to criticize leftist ideology. I had started to move maybe in a more conservative direction, and my grandparents kind of helped with that too. Because especially my grandfather, like, he's been very critical of the whole Democratic Party for many years. And I was finally starting to see his side of things. And there were, you know, I'm not sure how much of them were chemical effects or how much of them were placebo effects, but I did feel like less of a compulsion to, like, argue or be impatient, or you know, I was much more open to having my worldview criticized at that point, because I realized that not being able to criticize or not being criticized, like, had led me down a very dark path. And that was still happening within the context of my transition. So things happening, slowly picking up steam. And then finally I read about autogynephilia. I read about, you know, I read it from Blanchard and from Anne Lawrence and everything. I had a breakdown for a few months, really trying to, like, exercise those trans identity demons, and, like, okay, you're not really a woman, this is really what's going on, and you know, still worrying about being male and everything, like, still, like, trying to deny it. Still, that was an intolerable thought, but I got over it, I guess. And at that point was when I actually, even a little before that, even a little before the autogynephilia point, I realized that they were sterilizing children. Like, even before I realized that being a trans woman doesn't mean anything, I was appalled that there were leftist friends of mine that were upset that Arkansas had banned puberty blockers for children under 16. And they were out of their minds sorrowful for all the poor trans girls that were never going to get their Lupron. Meanwhile, in my mind, I'm like, these are, even as a teen, I was like, I wish I was on hormones, whatever. But like as an adult, I'm like, yeah, teens should not be on it. Like children should not be on it. Like this should not be something that 11-year-olds are taking. So even before I got to the autogynephilia part, I was looking into the medical effects of it on adolescents, because that was becoming a concern. And then after that, it's hard with the timelines. It's very muddy at this point because it was a very tumultuous time. But yeah,
if you are looking for resources to build up a positive identity and make peace with your manhood, and getting out or becoming critical of the trans or the gender ideology movement, you have a bunch of resources written for and by women from a very particular female perspective that, as you say, and as some of us know, can tend to be very anti-male. It doesn't sound like you have something to build from. And then you find AGP, autogynephilia. That's something that positively describes you, but it still positively describes you in a negative light. It's still not like, how do you become okay with yourself and apart from, criticizing bad ideas, but become whole?
Okay. Well, the becoming whole part was, I am still working on it.
Join the club.
But I am, I started to think like, okay, well, I don't want to go infertile. I don't want to damage, like, I don't want to destroy my body for nothing. Like, if I really am just a male with this like weird inverted sexuality, like I can find others like me that haven't transitioned and I can talk to them. And there was, I had gone to a couple different forums, but I found that there were a lot of people on hormones there and they were selling hormones and whatever. So it wasn't the best, but I tried to avoid all that. I tried to find an answer without hormones, and I tried to find a way to get off of them, like cognitively, because getting off of them as far as like physically, you just wean off of them or you go cold turkey, it doesn't matter. But in doing so and trying to find such a community, I ended up in Ludwig von Riesenstein's Discord. I think you've spoken to her before. She's a detrans woman with autoandrophilia. And while there, like, there were a bunch of guys, including and her too, who were just like, you already are the person you are. Like, you're already like not that, you're not that bad. You're a pretty good person. Like, you have some pretty good qualities, like, and the gender stuff, like presenting as female and wearing women's clothes and stuff, like, you might feel very emotionally attached to that because that's still carved into your identity, but like that's just an affect. Like what you wear on the outside is not going to change who you are. It's going to change how people perceive you, which was also something that I had trouble with. But, that's not going to change who you are on the inside. And now my counter argument was like, it kind of does, because if people see you differently, like, you're going to navigate through the world differently and whatever. But
there's a give and take.
But they were like, yeah, but you don't, like, you have to make the decision, like, do you want to be on these drugs forever? Do you want to be lying to people forever? Do you want to, like, do you want to do all that? Do you want to, like, put up this performance of someone you're not, or do you just want to be yourself? And I decided, okay, I just want to be myself. But I didn't have anything immediately to answer, like, what myself was. And now that I've actually started to detransition, I've been off HRT for a couple weeks. I've been I've been starting to like purge my closet of like women's clothes and stuff. Not entirely. I still, there's some stuff that still looks good on me and is comfortable and whatever, but like I don't introduce myself as a woman anymore. I don't do any of that, I shed any sort of like desire to like be referred to as female. But the way that I did that really was just be like, okay, well, I already am this person. I don't have to fake it, and I don't have to like hurt myself to do it either. And as far as like what my positive identity is, like the way that I conceptualize myself now is I'm a grandson, I'm a brother, I'm a member of a family unit, I'm the brainy one in my friend, one of the brainy ones in my friend group. I'm the one that like really gets excited about like seeing like a cute animal or something. I get like visibly excited. I'm just the person that I already am, basically. Like is how I came to terms with it. And slowly too, like I had over the course of my transition, I had developed an attraction to men. And it was also through that I started to realize that there were a lot of masculine traits that I didn't find negative, and that were actually quite, attractive to me in another person, but also attractive to me, like, as something admirable that maybe I would want to emulate, even if I did think of myself as a woman or whatever. And so I thought about those traits, and I was like, oh, there's no reason I can't embody those if I try, So, and so now I'm just, I guess that's my positive identity is I'm just here. I'm embodied. I'm
you're
not
a teacher.
Just trapped. And I'm a teacher. That's also something. Yeah. That's also a major thing. Yeah, actually. Yeah.
I have to say that I have to go.
Yeah.
Not immediately, but I don't like scheduling talks this late because I just found somebody I want to listen to for 3 hours, but I can't. So we can't leave the conversation and wrap it all up. But thinking of that, what are going forward? I was just attracted to your Twitter account and very educated and smart stuff. So it sounds like you have a lot to do, a lot to give to the world. And I know you're being a teacher and stuff, but what are some of the resources or projects, or if you want to craft an online identity based on your experience to give wisdom to people, what would that look like? And what are some of the things that you would want to have offered yourself, or that you can offer now to people who would find themselves in a similar situation to you?
Right now, the focus, so my Twitter is kind of just I just do whatever. I'm not very organized with the Twitter, but the Substack, I'm trying to gear it more towards parents who have kids going through the same thing. And, in talking to other detransitioners, both male and female, like a lot of us, it turns out, have really fucked up families. So I, at first I was like wary a little bit because I was like, I don't know, not every parent is up to code, I guess. But then thinking about it, like there are a lot of groomer teachers and stuff. So, and a lot of them are getting it from the internet. Like I got it from the internet. Everyone got it from the internet. So I want the Substack to be more informative for the parents. I don't want to gear it towards, and for the older guys too that are going through the same thing. I can't speak for the girls necessarily. I sometimes do, but that's only because my girlfriend and I were very much the same in a lot of ways, and she could have ended up being like a detransitioner. She was a detransitioner, I guess. So, yeah, I'm mostly trying to gear the Substack towards parents. I'm trying to, like, lately I have one article that I've been writing on the whole multiple personality thing on TikTok, and relating it to my experiences, because I have talked about it being like two souls in my body at the same time. So it's the same thing to me. It looks like it's the same thing to me. And I want to like get into how that is. And then I have another one after that talking about Tumblr feminism from both the male and the female perspective, and how that was extremely important in getting a lot of the early transitioners to transition. Because, and specifically not the points that were like, transition is good, because that's obvious, like that's the obvious part, but the earlier bits that sound a lot like contemporary radical feminist rhetoric, that was a lot of scaremongering, a lot of anti-male hatred, a lot of like divisiveness, a lot of that. So I want to get into that, because that was really my vector for being vulnerable to trans ideology itself. So those are the two things. And I want, and part of the reason I want to focus that second article to the parents, because a lot of them are moms, and a lot of them are in the gender critical movement, and a lot of them are, a lot of them have some of those radical feminist beliefs just because of how they've swapped ideas back and forth. And I want to point out, like, this is not going to convince your kid of anything. Like, this is not going to convince your kid to detransition. This is not going to save your kid. You're going to, like, this is going to help push them, because it's helpful to understand the way the ideology functions, like what it promises and everything.
And the pushes and the pulls into it.
Yeah. As for the rest of Twitter, as for like everything, I hope to have some sort of like freelance career, maybe as a side gig. I want to be a teacher primarily, but I want to, I like writing. I really do like writing. And I don't think I'm smart enough right now to have like very careful takes on a lot of subjects, on a lot of pop culture. So I'm not nearly as refined as I'd like to be, and the people that I follow make that very clear. But I think that I have the capacity to get to that point where I have some sort of actual project to put forth that's broader than just transition. I think that these experiences have been very important for me in deconstructing ideology and paying attention to how it functions, and looking into power networks within the Democratic Party and everything like that. But so was being part of the leftist cult thing too, because I was like, it was a big anti-prison group, this one that I was in, and I saw a lot of like connections to the NGOs and connections to the academy while I was there. I had taken other courses with professors that were openly like CIA and stuff. So I've had those experiences. I've been around those circles, so I have an idea of how they function, and I think that with time and with enough effort, I can offer something broader, I think. Yeah.
That sounds really exciting. I'm going to have to have you back on just to talk about the CIA stuff and how they're poisoning our brains with the internet, whatever. But what about men's groups or resources for men? Because in my exploration of this topic, it's been very rare to speak to a male, especially detransitioner male. And I'm sure that there's a lot of psychology going on with that, but I perceive that there needs to be some sort of resource. Whether or not men are attracted to a resource of one sort or another is an open question. But what do you think about that, or what are some of the things that you would hope developed as time went on and more detransition occurs, and resources specific to males, and what those would look like?
I don't really know. So the group that I'm primarily in, that I primarily talk about this stuff in, is modeled a little bit after like an AA group. A little bit, not really. It's more just like a chat room, honestly. But it is. There are points of it, and Ludwig makes an effort to try to like get people to read like the AA manual and everything, and get us to like attend meetings just for the sake of like trying to better our lives in general, because a lot of the rumination happens when you're like stuck inside your head, or you're under lockdown, or you don't have things going your way or whatever. So so that's sort of what she tries to push, and I'm grateful for it. I have to confess I haven't started reading it because I have a lot of other reading I got to do, but it has been that kind of thing has been helpful. I think other groups that are like that, I think having that, like, you know, very strict rule set of like, okay, you can't push transition on anybody, you can't judge anybody for having transitioned either, but like you can't push it on anybody. You have to be brutally honest about what the risks are, and generally just like try to encourage each other to like live normal lives, really, and you know, get out of your head, get physical, you know, try to find love, whatever, like trying to do that kind of thing. As it stands, like when it comes to the main detrans thing, like there's a detrans Reddit, and there's a detrans Discord server. I have been in the detrans Reddit before. I have posted a fair bit. I haven't posted in more than 6 months, just because it's I don't know, like that seems to be where like all the crisis cases are getting caught. It's not as much people that are like that have been detransitioned for a long time. Like there is some of that. It's very grateful. There are a lot of pinned posts, but a lot of the time, and increasingly so over the last couple of years, it is like a lot of people like, I just found out trans is not real. I've just found out that my body is like dying. I just found out, like, you know, it's a lot of that, and it's a lot of lamentation, and a lot of it is more for women. A lot of it is more for, there are guys in there too, but it seems like it's mostly women. I don't know, so for the Discord server though, they did break it up by sex. Like there's the main server, and then there's like two sort of splinter channels, one for men, one for women. But there was some concern there because men weren't allowed into the women one, but women were allowed into the men one. I'm not totally sure what the deal was with that. That's why I'm not totally sure what the deal was with that, but it was sus to me. It was sus to me, and there was like, the thing is that with a lot of detrans women, and I totally get why, like they get drawn into radical feminism very quickly. Like it happens very quickly, and a lot of the more famous detransitioners have talked about that too. And I don't think it's healthy, especially not for men. So I'm not, but there is another detrans server that is a spin-off of the main one that is less active, but it's very uplifting. It's basically just a bunch of feminine guys. Some of them have, not all of them are feminine, but some of them have autogynephilia, some of them are gay, some of them are just confused. There's some teenagers, there's some, you know, in their 30s, and, you know, it's just, people are very brutally honest, and they very very deliberately try to keep people away from like re-identifying as trans. The big problem though is that even a lot of men who consider themselves detrans, they stay on hormones, and that I don't think should be considered detrans, because like that's the most harmful part, honestly. Like one, I mean, neither of them are neither of them are good, but like it's just ruining your body, you know, like it's not good. I don't know. I feel like there should be more of an I don't know what the future of that looks like. I'm not a psychologist. But like the landscape right now is pretty not good. It's pretty not good.
Gosh darn it. So many black pills. Education sucks.
I'm not
This
black
sucks.
pilled though.
I know, you're not.
not
I'm just saying, we live in a fallen world, and that has been highlighted by this wonderful conversation. So the conversation itself has been enlightening, not darkening, but still.
If I can, I know that we're about to leave. I know that you have to go. I have to go too. But I will say, like, throughout all of that, like, the main thing, like, throughout everything that I've been through whatever, you know, like, the big thing is the worst I was, like, at my absolute rock bottom was when I thought that everything sucked, was when I thought that everything was falling to shit, when the apocalypse was nigh, when I was completely and totally black-pilled, that nothing good would ever happen in anyone's lives ever again. Having gone through all of that and come out, you know, in grad school, I'm starting the career of my dreams. I'm, you know, and people take me seriously, and I have a good relationship with my family and like all of and I'm even off hormones, and it doesn't even really like bother me that much. Like it's annoying, but it's not like terrible. There are still like good things in the world. Like, even though there's still hope for everything, like, even though education sucks and doesn't look like it's going to get better anytime soon, and even though there aren't like spaces for male detransitioners or whatever, like, I have some confidence that some things will get better even if other things get worse. Like, I have that confidence now, and I encourage everyone to not despair about that.